People think of growth and they always think top of funnel. And I think the industry's starting to evolve now where people understand that there's really no point in filling the top of the funnel if you have a leaky bucket. If you're going to focus on retention, the first thing you have to think about is how are you delivering value to this customer? And if you're not delivering value to your customer, then no series of hacks or changes is really going to matter.
Hi everybody, my name's Luke and we're back this time to talk about the retention growth team. Plus we interviewed Justin Bauer, the VP of Product at Amplitude. Retention is the key metric that will make or break 80% of businesses. SaaS, e-commerce, marketplaces, apps, services, and subscription models, their growth depends on strong and healthy retention. Daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly active users or customers are the lifeblood of these companies. The thing with retention as well is it's a tricky metric to improve. It's deeper down in the customer journey and it's normally product driven. To retain customers, normally retention teams focus on improving product features or changing onboarding flows. A non-technical retention team will try and improve retention by using emails and notifications. However, as retention is deeply associated with the product, more developers and more data are involved. Therefore, a retention team normally grows through extra development power, UX skills, and data scientists. So why does this team require more developers? To run effective experiments, the first obstacle for the retention team is to align closely with the technical department to build testing processes into the IT infrastructure from day one and to allocate one or more team members to the retention growth team. Experiments on retention need additional analysts as the data is more complex, harder to clean up and manipulate. Analysts will focus on the difficult tasks of correlation analysis, modeling attribution, measuring the statistical reliability of experiments, and coming up with reliable experiment outcomes. The growth data scientists in the team also enable the team to come up with new ideas based on the quantitative data they manipulate. In other words, they give you insight into the data they've collected and help you run more effective experiments. Now let's hear from Justin, the VP of Product from Amplitude. He talks about the importance of retention and common mistakes to avoid. As always, we've included a downloadable guide on the link below, which also includes the retention playbook from Amplitude. So how does Amplitude approach growth as a company?
We are an enterprise B2B company. Our sales model is actually through salespeople. We still have a growth team. I think we're actually still figuring out exactly what that means in enterprise sales. But we still use a lot of the same tactics that you would have within growth organizations. When we look at user acquisition, right, we're taking a much deeper look than just what's like a CPI, cost per install or cost per acquisition, but understanding for that account, what is the lifetime value of that account? And that enables us to think about how much to spend when we're doing user acquisition. We build out a lot of technology to help nurture both prospects before they actually end up purchasing Amplitude. And then we do a lot of effort, obviously, on the product side. How do we increase both our net retention, but also our user retention? We believe that user retention is a leading indicator of account retention, so it's really important to focus on both.
Who would look after that, the sales team or the growth team?
So the growth team builds the technology to drive that. The sales and marketing team are the ones that actually act on it. So we're trying to apply a product and growth mindset towards go-to-market, which in enterprise B2B has traditionally not been done. But we still have marketing teams, we still have sales team, we can't ignore them. We're not going to automate all of that. So it's more about how do we enable them through technology to do a better job.
When we talk about building teams, we want to think about who do we need to hire or what skill set do we need to bring internally inside the organization to help us on retention. Maybe you can help us giving us some ideas on that.
First off, if you're building out a growth team or a product team, I think the most important thing is people that are driven for impact. They want to see results, and that is what they live and breathe off of. And they want to be measured on how well they actually drive a metric that matters. That just is an overall kind of way that they look at the world. That's super important. Then there are some actual tactical skills that I think are really important. It is a quantitative field. If you're going to be understanding retention, you need to understand users, you need to feel very comfortable with the tools of the trade. Obviously Amplitude is one of them, and so I think you're a person who's really embracing that. But at the same time, you also understand the qualitative side. You can talk to users to understand, and you have a great mental model of how the world works. Because that's going to be how you're going to come up with all the hypotheses that you're going to test. Because really, it's about a bunch of hypotheses, figuring out which ones are the most valuable ones, how do you move quickly through them, which ones actually have impact on the metrics, the ones that don't, diving into the data, understand why. It's this kind of way of you're constantly just curious and trying to figure out how to create impact. And so if that's your mindset, I think those are the types of people that I look for. Those are the types of PMs and growth people that I hire within my team. You see that in people that start companies. That's like a great, and so we actually hire a lot of people who start companies. You see that in people who come from industries like gaming, where metrics were really important, but they haven't just been solely focused on metrics, but they actually have examples of building real product.
How does Amplitude work on retention? So what's the process?
You start with the core problem. So we call it a North Star metric. So we're trying to drive, we call it weekly querying users. And then I have one pod, that's kind of what we call our product development groups, that is focused on empowering novice users to learn how to use Amplitude. Leading indicator metric is first week retention. As I mentioned before, it's really important to understand that retention is a hard metric to move, and there is no silver bullet. And so what we do is we identify what are the leading indicators of retention, and that's typically aligned with our strategy. Our strategy right now that we believe is the way to learn Amplitude is to actually see someone else who has used Amplitude and then pivot off of their chart. They do what we call valuable consumption, and we measure that, and then we have tactics to actually drive that. So we've released features, we've made changes to the product, some failed, some succeeded at improving that. As that metric has gone up, we've started to see retention go up because it takes time for the retention metric to change. And so that's like one of the things that I definitely recommend for everyone to understand is like, what are the leading indicators of retention? We actually came up with a whole framework that we developed with a number of our customers, many of which actually came from the gaming space. And it's a way to basically segment your users by the different stages that they are at. And we found that by understanding that, then you can actually improve retention in multiple ways. So most people, when they think of retention, they think just of like the very beginning parts of retention. And that's really important. And we call that new user retention. But that's not the only part of the retention curve that matters. You can actually raise up kind of the broader parts of your retention curve by focusing on what we call current users and resurrected users. Current users are users who used your product in the previous period. How many of them then came back the next week? And that actually, we call that the current user retention portion of your curve. If you can improve that, then you can actually see huge growth within your overall user base. And then the final part of the curve is what we call the resurrected user retention. So it's those who are now dormant. They have used your product in the past, but have now dropped off. What can you do to resurrect them? And you can see massive ROI in actually sending them a re-engagement campaign with some new part of your product or something new that you have fixed. Saying, hey, we actually have implemented these new features. Would love to have you come back. Or actually giving them like coupons or things like that to say, hey, like we saw you loved us in the past, like here's $5 off. We actually worked with a pretty large client of ours in the US and discovered that it was actually better for them to send someone a $5 coupon to re-engage than actually to do the same amount of money on new user retention. So they actually shifted a good portion of their acquisition budget towards re-engagement, and it had a massive impact on their retention. And for that product, retention was tightly linked with revenue. So it actually made them a lot of money by just doing that one thing. And so that's why we broke them out, because there's actually very different tactics depending on whether you're trying to improve new user, current user, resurrected user. Some of those tactics that you can use, how do you understand your users in each different segment, and ultimately increase retention in each.
The next one people want to know is kind of how you work inside the organization. Do you work in sprints or?
So we use kind of more of a Kanban model. So we have our overall objectives that we're trying to drive. So those typically get defined on a quarterly basis. So that would be like overall retention, right? Week 1 retention, what are we trying to drive? And then we have 6-week kind of key results that we're trying to drive. So that would be the valuable consumption metric. And I align with the pod on those metrics, like how much do we want to see as an improvement there. The pod has full autonomy to then figure out what they want to do to drive that. So they will do a balance of long-term and short-term bets against that. And I kind of, it's up to them. I'm obviously aligned with what the strategy is, but honestly, it's really up to the team then to run quickly. And so some teams, 1 6-week iteration might choose, we're going to do a bunch of like quick hitter experiments because we want to see what we can learn and see what happens from that. Other teams will say, we want to put the whole 6 weeks towards this like big bet because we've done a bunch of experiments earlier, we feel conviction behind it, and now we're going to do a pretty big feature for a 6-week period. It kind of just depends on what stage each of those teams are at to make that call. We do try to keep things relatively small, so ideally you're shipping in like a 1 to 4 day iteration. So like if we did a big project, like Team Spaces, this feature I mentioned before, was like a 6-week iteration, but we didn't just like drop all of it 6 weeks in. There are a bunch of features that we built out, and then we have beta teams that basically are using that, giving feedback while we're building it out.
So from your point of view, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see from companies focusing on maybe the wrong thing when it comes to retention, and how to avoid them?
I mean, the first most common thing is not focusing on retention, as we talked about. So people think of growth and they always think top of funnel. And I think the industry's starting to evolve now where people understand that like there's really no point in filling the top of the funnel if you have a leaky bucket. If you're going to focus on retention, the first thing you have to think about is, how are you delivering value to this customer? And if you're not delivering value to your customer, then no series of hacks or changes is really going to matter. And then once you feel like you are delivering great value, now growth can come in. You start to see your retention curve flatten out. That's a great signal that you actually have product market fit with a subset of customers. And now it's about, how do we get this value to more people? And then there are a bunch of tactics that you can use to do that, but you got to start there.
So Justin, thank you very much. And it's been really useful. I know myself, I've learned a lot in this very short interview. And for those of you that are watching, if you've got any questions about retention, just put it in the comments and we'll get back to you. And we'll also include the retention playbook that we mentioned in the downloadable resources at the end of the video.